Can governments and markets really absorb a reduction of almost 2.5 trillion of liquidity? Very, very difficult. See, one of the things that we fail to talk about in numerous occasions is the fact that governments benefit enormously from inflation and benefit enormously from liquidity injections. Obviously, from inflation, why? Because they collect more tax revenues from indirect taxes and they pass the burden of public debt to the real economy, to savers and to wages. And the second is because liquidity injections generate a massive inflow into government debt. Both the central bank but also savers purchase more sovereign bonds. The central bank makes the sovereign bond extremely expensive and at the same time maintains that level of liquidity in the economy, and the first recipient of money is the most benefited, and the first recipient of money is government. Money creation is never neutral. It disproportionately benefits those that receive money first, the indebted, government, and the sectors that have already access to debt and to assets. Second, it disproportionately negatively affects those that behave more prudently throughout a crisis or any economic cycle. Salaries, real wages are plummeting in the United States despite unemployment reduction and the recovery. And at the same time, savings, because a vast majority of savers have the little amount of money that they have acquired throughout a period of time in what? In deposits. So real wages and deposit savings plummet. Very important to understand why governments will not tolerate a $2.5 trillion reduction of liquidity from central banks as the market estimates. First, it would create a massive collapse in equity and asset classes and different asset classes. Why? Think about this. In 2018, a 500 billion reduction in liquidity generated a huge collapse in equity markets and high volatility in financial assets. But what it generated as well was an immediate U-turn of monetary policy from the Federal Reserve. In January, it changed its path of rate hikes and it changed its path of reduction of repurchases. So think about this. A 500 billion reduction in 2018 creates a turmoil in markets and puts numerous sovereign issuers at risk with rising levels of the cost of borrowing. Now markets are expecting a 2.5 trillion reduction. Do you think it's going to happen? Very unlikely. And more importantly, because the reason why you and I think that central banks are going to take away 2.5 trillion of liquidity from the markets is because we think that they will try to combat inflation. But at the same time, governments are benefiting from inflation, both from the reduction in the real value of debt and the increase in indirect tax receipts. So, if we have to decide from a policy standpoint whether to inflate assets, maintain liquidity injections, keep deficit spending governments happy, and at the same, or look at the option of reducing inflation, what are policymakers going to decide? Very likely to keep the current situation. It's very, very difficult to believe that we will see a 2.5 trillion reduction in liquidity. That it's very difficult to believe that we are going to see that liquidity being offset by the private economy when the private economy is so indebted and so geared to those same policies. The public sector needs the inflation tax and needs the liquidity injections to keep a deficit spending spree that they don't want to reduce and they are unwilling to change. And this in itself, added to the elevated levels of debt, make it virtually impossible to see such a drastic reduction in liquidity. The $30 trillion debt with a massive deficit of the United States is not going to be offset by private sector demand for treasuries, when even in the estimates of the Federal Reserve, those bonds are going to yield below inflation expectations for at least half a decade. So remember, when you talk about inflation and governments tell you that they're worried about it, remember that they benefit from inflation. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.